Well, my name is Paula Stokes, and I'm an Irish artist living in Seattle. I moved here almost 30 years ago, and even though I go back regularly, this is my home now. I grew up in Ireland in the 1970s and 1980s, and Ireland at that time was not a very wealthy country, but we made the best of it. I had a pretty great childhood. If to give you some context, up until 1976, we only had a television that was in black and white and had one TV station. So we were kind of out there in the wild Atlantic Ocean, but it was great. And I was, as I said, I was born there, I grew up there, I was educated there. And then in 1993, I moved to America. Let's see. The inspiration came from, well, just to actually to pursue my career. My background, I'm an artist, and I studied in Ireland and went to the National College of Art and Design and specialised in a degree in design, specialising in glass. And after I graduated from college, I emigrated. Actually, I went to England for a year to pursue my studies in the Midlands, and I did a one-year course in glassmaking and technology. And then I was headhunted. I was offered a job in Ireland to be a designer at a glass factory. And I moved back to Ireland and was waiting for the call to start working there. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, the job never came through. It was really disappointing. I was really young. My parents were so excited that I was going to live in Ireland, and that I was going to actually have a job based on, my background in arts, which of course is a very hard profession to make a living in. So consequently, I was at home living at my parents' house in my early 20s and on the dole, which is a really horrible, horrible place to be when you're just about to start your life. So while I was at home despairing and driving everybody mad, I applied for a green card in the lottery. And at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a really big push here in America from different senators advocating for Irish citizens, both here and in Ireland, to help people come to America and work in America. So I got a green card and I moved to America. Very, very lucky. And that was the beginning of it, my life here in America. And it was really just so that I could pursue my career and have a job and be independent of my parents. That's a good question. Well, I did arrive in America. My first stop was in New York, just for a week. My brother also emigrated, and he was living there, and he still lives there. So I went to visit with him, but my plan was always to come to Seattle. One of my best friends, who I was in college with in Ireland, also got a green card at the same time, a couple of months before I did. And she had done her homework and had researched the glass industry in America and identified Seattle as a center of contemporary glassmaking. And bear in mind, this was before the internet and we didn't have cell phones, and, all her research was done at the library in the college. So she had moved here and was writing to me weekly because she was so lonely. And as as it is, it's a very lonely experience. She was all alone. She didn't have anybody in Seattle. And she said, if you really want to work in glass, like we studied to do, you should move to Seattle because there are lots of opportunities here. And so I came to Seattle. I was so lucky. I had a landing pad, essentially. She didn't. She put me up. I shared her bed. We were just talking about it last night. She was living in the U District, and I moved in with her, shared her bed actually for a couple of months until another room opened up in the house. And then that's the rest is history. So Seattle, as I said, has an amazing epicenter of glassmaking, contemporary glassmaking in the world. And probably at that time in the early 90s, everything was really booming here. And artists like Dale Chihuly and Flora Mace, Joy Kirkpatrick, they were all just in their stride. They were still also accessible in terms of if you made a phone call to their studio, they might actually pick up and answer it. So that's what I did. I moved here to pursue my career and to work as a studio assistant to begin with all these established professional artists and to learn from them. I arrived in 1993. It was Labor Day weekend, and there was a heat wave here. It was in the 80s. which is a heat wave by Irish standards. And I broke out in a complete body rash. I was like, this is too hot. It was awful. I was itchy. And I thought I would never adapt. But that's, of course, kind of rare enough here in the Northwest. I think the similarities are pretty obvious, just with the climate is so forgiving here. It's really wet, it's lush, it's green, beautiful scenery. And it's kind of, and even though Seattle has evolved and changed a lot in the last 30 years, I always had this feeling that it's quite provincial in a way. And in that, and I don't mean that in a condescending way, there was a kind of a small town feel to the city of Seattle. And of course it has changed, but so it was to move to a city like this was not as intimidating as maybe moving to a city like New York or Chicago, where it's just, packed and thronged. There's a lot of wide open spaces. And the people were just very laid back and very welcoming. And of course, I know that you had asked me a question about there are very few native Washingtonians that I know. Most of the people here have emigrated or moved here from different parts of America, from all over the states. So I don't think there's any distinct kind of Washington type of personality, but people are kind of reserved, and it takes a while for them to warm up to you. And then being an Irish person, I can't help but be outgoing and effusive. So, there is that difference that Irish people are very nosy and kind of in your face, whereas people here are a little bit more reserved. But that doesn't mean they aren't as kind. Yes, it very much is. I have to admit, growing up in Ireland, I never imagined that I was going to live in Ireland when I left college. I mean, we were just conditioned to understand that that was part of the reality of being Irish. And as I said, Ireland in the 70s and 80s was not a very prosperous country. And, we studied other languages. I originally thought I was going to live in Denmark because there's a glass community there. But I never, ever imagined living in Ireland, which is kind of sad in a way. When you think about it, you grow up somewhere, but you're educated and it's an understood thing that you will probably have to emigrate. My father, in his time, even when he was married to my mom, he lived in England and he worked in England, providing for the family. He also lived and worked in Iran for almost a year when I was a child. And you just followed the work. And often, even if it was in the same country, in Ireland, we were living in Tipperary early on, and he was working in Navan, up County Meath, where my family eventually settled. So there was always this understanding that those were just sacrifices you had to make. And of course, the circumstances of my immigration are very different from those even in the 50s or 60s, or even the 70s or 80s. I chose to come here, and it was a fantastic opportunity. And I also had the benefit of being able to go home, unlike people who preceded me often couldn't afford to. In my mother's family, all her siblings, except for two of them, she was one of 9 from County Kerry, they all emigrated. A lot of them moved to England, to London, and then she had a brother in Australia and in Canada. And the brother in Australia had left Ireland when he was 20, and my mother was 10. He was the oldest and she was the youngest. And they didn't reunite and see each other for another 30 years after that. He just lived in Australia and didn't come back to Ireland until 30 years after he'd emigrated. It was a huge family reunion. But that's really poignant, very sad, but my circumstances are different, that I could go home and it's just a different world. But it's just kind of in our DNA. And America has been fantastic for me. And I credit it with the opportunities that were afforded me here. And I know it wasn't just pure luck. A lot of it was, but also I worked really hard. But there was a real openness here and a can-do attitude and a welcoming in the community that I work in that just wasn't really available in Ireland because there just wasn't an awful lot going on. And so I'm delighted. I'm so grateful, and I'm so glad that I moved here. Even though I miss home, I get to go there. So I have the best of both worlds. Yeah, so that's a good question. I was thinking about that earlier. A lot of the work I did creatively over the last 30 years was definitely very much inspired by the philosophy I had, or knowledge that I had gained from actually studying in Ireland, and influences of European design and glassmaking. And it took me a very long time to become, anyway, adept at glassmaking. You know, I went to art college, came out with my big degree, and I really couldn't really blow very much glass. It's not like it's a technical school, it was an art school. So it took years and years of working with other artists and practicing to get to a level of competence to make my own work. So for a lot of the time early on, I was kind of honing that, and it took me a long time because I wasn't just being an artist 24/7. The reality of being an artist, and I've been lucky insofar as that I've worked for other artists and learned from them, working in their studio as an independent contractor. And I also worked as a teacher. I've taught thousands of people how to blow glass. I don't do that anymore. I also, you know, worked in nonprofit, in education, in the visual arts, and then also worked in an Irish bar. So, you know, when you're juggling all those jobs in order to make a living, just to survive, there's not a lot of bandwidth or energy left over at the end of the day to be the artist that you hope to be. So, I guess I'm explaining this because I think it's a huge commitment to pursue this sort of career, and it's really hard to make it. And there are lots of things you have to do in order to make it so. So it took me a long time to develop a body of work that was very much based in design and color and principles of all those kind of fundamentals of art. And I was quite happy doing that sort of work, very joyful work, very playful, object-based work. But to fast forward to now, to the present day, and to the work that I'm doing now, and it's in Ireland on displays, on a touring exhibition throughout the island. That came about in the last, I don't know, it kind of started about 15, 16 years ago, the beginnings of the idea, a kernel of idea. But because it was really at that time, for me, I was analyzing or kind of thinking about the fact that I was living in America almost as long as I had lived in Ireland. And how do you bridge those two different identities of being, you know, an Irish person living in a foreign country? And even though we speak English here, and, you know, I had pretty easy passage into this country, fundamentally, you know, you still always feel a little bit at odds. You feel like, oh, I'm Irish, but I'm in America. Am I Irish? Am I American? What am I? You know, do I belong in either realm? But for me, the older I was getting, the more I was like looking to, like, you know, how do I retain my sense of Irishness and my Irish heritage? And all of that just is there in my essence, while just managing to live here. And that was what kind of was the catalyst for me to create this body of work. And it has to do with being, well, it's about the Irish famine, the Great Hunger of the 1800s, but it's also about emigration and about how we retain our cultural identities while navigating new worlds. And then also what it means to be an immigrant and in a foreign country, and how you're treated. And how that is a story that is constant, and we can only look so far as what's happening in Ukraine right now, with like thousands and thousands of people fleeing their country because of war, and how these patterns occur all the time in history and in contemporary times. And, you know, being displaced or moving to another country is such a traumatizing, not traumatizing, it's traumatizing if you're displaced, but it's a big event. And how do we as people treat each other in those times, and how we shouldn't forget where we all come from, and extend decency and kindness to each other. So that's kind of the gist of what this work was about. It's also it is made in hot glass, it's blown glass, and it's a memorial to the famine, and it's comprised of thousands of hand-blown glass potatoes that I then adapt and build into different installations depending on the space in which I'm exhibiting the work. And I've been so lucky because the work has been received so well in Ireland. I've shown it in 2 heritage sites and 2 national museums in the north of Ireland, and now currently in the Republic of Ireland. And a lot of these places have a history themselves that's connected with the famine. So by the placement of the work in those spaces, it creates a different kind of experience, because it's the patina, or the history of that space, amplifies the experience of viewing and understanding the work. So that's kind of a long, shaggy dog. Of course, you knew when you were interviewing an Irish person that you wouldn't get yes and no answers. But that is something where I'm at the stage of my life now. I'm in my early 50s, and this undertaking has been huge. It's been years in the making, and hours and hundreds of hours of labor and project management, all of which I have done pretty much myself. I've been assisted and helped along the way by very generous mentors and friends. But essentially, I've taken 30 years of experience of working with other artists, like Dale Chihuly is one of my most important mentors. And everything that I learned from working from him, I'm now applying into my own work, which is amazing. It's a real gift to have learned from people like that. This project, and until it's done, and it has taken up a huge amount of my time. So I'm not making new work. To answer that, I don't have any inspiration. This is all consuming. As I said, I'm not just the artist. I'm project managing, directing, every aspect. I write my own press releases, photography. I have a catalog that I'm expanding on. All of these things. I'm currently designing the exhibition to be placed in a new setting this summer, and which requires me designing an enormously long banquet table, which I'm currently working out in my basement. So this is all the kind of the behind the scenes stuff that happens when people see an exhibition or an installation in a public setting. They can appreciate it, but there's so much more work that goes on behind the scenes in the preparation of it. So right now I am committed to showing the work in Ireland for another year. I'm just in the process of getting my customs paperwork updated and extended so it can stay in the country. And my dream really is for it to stay there ultimately. And what I would love is if an institution in Ireland would acquire it into its collection. I think the work belongs in Ireland, even though it has been exhibited in America. And I have interest of other entities or cities that want to show it here in the States. But if I could keep it in Ireland, that would be a dream come true. Because it's really an homage to Irish people. And even though there are lots of Irish in America, I think it belongs in Ireland in a national institution that can be accessible and seen by everybody. So that's where I'm at. I hope to wrap this up this year. Because I don't want to be traveling it for the next 20. I think when that time comes, it'll probably open up more space for me to think about new work, or maybe I may never make any more work ever again. I don't know. It's deeply personal, and it's a lot of work, and I'll just see what the future presents to me. We'll see. I might go back into more non-profit work, and I kind of varies, kind of undulates. Lots of work on myself. Lots of work for other people. So the future we'll see. We'll see what the future holds. So there is obviously an Irish community here, but it's quite different, I would imagine, than from like cities like New York, Chicago, Atlanta, that have really deeply entrenched roots with many, many generations of Irish. Seattle is a new city. It's just over 100 years old, and even though Irish have settled here, it doesn't have that same, like there are not whole neighborhoods that are devoted to like the Irish. There's the Irish pubs, the Irish shops, etc. And I think, I know people who moved here in the 60s. They're the elders in the community, amazing people. There's an Irish Heritage Club that celebrates all things Irish here and across the board: sports, culture, cuisine. They present a big Irish festival every year at the Seattle Centre. So there is that. There are people who have been here a long time, but I think a lot of the more kind of contemporary immigration here would have been in the tech industry. So people working for Amazon or Microsoft or Google or whatever, or Boeing. So it's like a different kind of generation of immigrants that moved here, and people who my age might just more identify as being European, even though they're Irish. There's kind of a modern person. But having said that, we do exist, and we are drawn to each other. And I've had an amazing support from the Irish community with this project as well. And in terms of just people coming up, showing up to my opening, and the Department of Foreign Affairs in San Francisco has been hugely supportive of helping me get the word out about my exhibition. And so to answer your question, what does it mean to be Irish here? I don't know. I don't even know what it means to be Irish, to be honest, because, obviously I was born there, I grew up there, so I have a sense, okay, I'm Irish. My mother's Irish, my father's Irish. But I know so many people who identify as Irish or have an affinity with the Irish, even if they've never been there, or maybe they have, ancestors who came from Ireland, but there's a connection there. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's an amazing thing. And I think about also how St. Patrick's Day is celebrated worldwide. It's not just in Ireland. It's like probably one of the few festivals of any kind of culture that is embraced across the world. And that's a credit to probably the 70 million plus diaspora that, exists all over the world. So we Irish, we're always adopting people. I think, to be honest, I don't really have a direct answer for that. But I do know that being Irish has helped open doors for me here, just by the virtue of my accent. And people are like, where are you from? After they kind of get over the shock of trying to understand me initially. But it definitely, there's a fondness for the Irish here in America that has definitely benefited me. And of course, obviously, I've worked hard for it too. But yeah, so, I'm a modern Irish citizen, or an American citizen, a modern Irish national living in America. And I just think it's great. It's great to have the best of both worlds. And as I said earlier, to be able to navigate going back and forth between Ireland, where I still have huge connections. My family still lives there. So it's very important to me to return there. So yeah, that's kind of about the gist of it, really. That's my answer. Long-winded.